Hello and welcome, everybody. So my name is Steven, and this is the show where we bring together HR experts to break down some of the most fundamental topics in the industry. Today, we're going to be covering pre-employment screenings. We have three amazing guests with us today. I'm going to go ahead and introduce them right now. Just give a little wave as we intro you here. We've got Kendra Anthony, who's the talent lead at Chexology. Got Nicole Little here with us, who's an HR business partner at Homespire Remodeling Group. And last but not least, we have Spencer Vance, who is an HR business partner at doTERRA. So great group today. We're going to dive right into our topic, pre-employment screenings, and learn something new, right? So let's start with just the basics. Like, what is the definition of pre-employment screening? Because there's a lot of other screenings that happen. There's resume screening. Anyways, screening is a very broad term. I want to turn it over actually to Kendra first, if you wouldn't mind. Tell us what is pre-employment screening?
Basically, in very simple terms, pre-employment screening is the process of verifying information that a candidate supplies on their resume or job application. And it can range from background and reference checks to behavioral and aptitude tests in the end.
That's awesome. You highlighted right there like a few things we're going to go into in depth to a little bit later, but awesome definition. Kind of a dumb question that I want to give over to Nicole and then Spencer here now is, okay, so you're verifying some information, but I mean, is this really necessary? Because, you know, if you're in the you look at the resume, you're interviewing them, you have all the relevant skills, they seem impressive to you. Can't we just trust them to do their job? Can we just move fast, just hire them? What do you think, Nicole? And then I'd love your thoughts as well, Spencer.
So no, in HR, you have to, you can't trust everything at face value. You have to look into it. So, if they have the education, we have to verify that. I mean, you want to make sure that your director of HR that's coming in or your chief operating officer truly has the background that they're saying they're having. They went to whatever university or they have whatever certification, because then that builds their background, and you have that ability to trust what they're saying because you know that what they said on their resume is true. You verified it, and now you know that they have the skills necessary to apply that to their daily activity functions. And then taking it a step further, we want to make sure they really are who they say they are too, right? So when we get further into the background past the resume that we're reviewing and we start doing verifying their I-9s and that piece of it, we need to make sure that, you know, Nicole Little really is Nicole Little and I don't have some other identity out there. So it's very important that we do our due diligence as we do as HR professionals and fact check what the person has told us.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would second a lot of what Nicole said. A big part of our function in human resources is to not only protect the company, but to try to help things run as efficiently as possible. And a big part of that is making sure that we may not be verifying every single little tidbit of information about a person, but helping managers identify what are going to be the most helpful things to verify, and making sure that we're doing that in an equitable fashion that isn't going to introduce more risk to the company of like discrimination or disparate impact.
Yeah. And I love you're already bringing up some legal stuff that I think we want to get into near the end here. But I think we built a good case here for, hey, let's check some things. We can't have 100% trust. And all three of you have started to name specific screenings or tests or things that you want to go over. I want to just do kind of a round robin here and get all of those tests out of the way. So we're going to do something kind of fun here where maybe we'll just start with Kendra, go to Nicole, Spencer, and kind of have this circle and just name one test that you think is important or that, you know, in some roles is important, and then why it's important and what the process might look like. Potentially, like if there's any vendors that you think people should consider? So that's like, I'm throwing 3 different parts to this question, but let's at least try to cover the why of the test and the how of the test as much as possible. Kendra, let's kick it over to you first. You want to start us off?
Sure. So one of the tests that I really appreciate is predictive index. They give you like a word cloud, and it's basically how you perceive yourself versus how others perceive, or how others you feel perceive you at work. And then they do some little magic voodoo behind the scenes, and they give you a profile of that person based on the answers that outline their strongest behaviors, their management style, their influencing style. And it also gives a little insight and tips into how you can manage them based on those factors. And I think it's a great way to kind of get a full understanding of the candidate you're talking to.
That's awesome. Nicole, let's just keep going. I'll stay out of it. Just keep going.
So I'll take it after that part. So once they do their PI and they're interviewed, I'm thinking more of we've extended the offer. So I'm looking at criminal background check, I think is huge. You want to make sure that if you're hiring a salesperson or a CFO, that there's nothing on their background that could influence who they are as a person for the organization, right? So you would strongly not want to move forward with hire if you have a CFO applicant who has fraud on their criminal background check, right? That's not going to be a good move for the organization. Same thing if you're looking at, if you have like a sales rep or somebody that's going to a customer's home, you want to make sure that they don't have any sort of charges, abuse, battery, things like that. You want to make sure that the employees that these individuals are working with are safe, the company is safe, and then any customers that are interacting with them are safe.
And to kind of build off that, another check that might be used for a position where an individual is making really impactful decisions to the company. So decisions that might impact the company very broadly or very deeply. So that may be measured in like millions of dollars or the number of people it involves. We may want to do a credit score check, make sure that they are managing their own financial things well, that they aren't incurring excessive debt. The same thing would be true for someone in a financial role. Mm-hmm. You wouldn't necessarily want to hire a financial analyst who hasn't done the things that we would expect them to do for us for themselves.
Yeah. Kendra, back to you. Let's keep it going until we run out of gas here.
Reference checks are something we're really big on as a startup. Reference checks are something that I do personally rather than outsourcing them. We do 3 reference checks for only the candidate we plan to hire. And so I will gear those reference checks questions to be reflective of interview questions that we have asked throughout the interview process. Basically, what I'm wanting to hear is same or similar answers from references that we've heard from the candidates, just to verify that they are telling me the truth. So if they say, oh, I've been coding for 9 years and I've built like this product, I can go back and verify that with that employer.
For my current and previous employers, I've done what's called a lift test. So what it does is the applicant will meet with a Concentra, an urgent care, a hospital, a physical therapist. And what they do is they go through a list of lifting, bending techniques to ensure that based on the applicant's role, a nurse who might be wheeling a bed with a patient on it, that they're able to safely do those tasks without causing any injury. That way it helps reduce your risk as an employer for workers' comp cases down the road. It also helps identify if there are any pre-existing issues that you need to accommodate that person for prior, like at the start of their employment with you.
And those are great. And I've used those especially for a lot of manufacturing type roles or roles that have a lot of physical labor. Another test that would be used for sort of the flip side, if you've got like a graphic designer, someone that is going to be doing a lot of creative work. Maybe it's an architect. A very common thing to require is that they submit a portfolio. Portfolios usually require a standard number of work samples from either their personal or professional work history.
Nice. Let's do one more loop here, and then maybe we'll call it good.
And another thing that we do is, as a tech startup, we have a lot of engineers, designers come in, as we said. Not only do we do portfolios, but we may have a working assessment that we do where we'll give them maybe an hour to complete a problem that we give them. And that's always paid because we don't want to waste a candidate's time. And we'll do only our top candidates. And so maybe we'll pick like 3 people who we want to go to the final interview with the founder. And those will be the ones that we'll send that test to, and then we give them a deadline to get that done and back to us.
The last one that we do, I've used the other ones that you said, Kendra and Spencer as well, but the standard drug testing. So we have, depending on the position and the work environment, you can work with, again, a third party, a hospital, an urgent care, a workers' comp location that can do different drug screen panels for you of whatever that looks like. If it's a urine sample, a mouth swab, there's so many different ways that you can drug test now, that you can make it very specific to what drugs you want to test for and how you want the vendor to collect that information for you.
Yeah, and those drug tests are going to be really helpful if they're operating heavy machinery, as well as anything else that could potentially cause harm, or if they're making significant business decisions. Another thing that can be really helpful is if somebody's operating, I know we don't often think of a car as, heavy machinery, but you've got 2,000, 3,000 pounds moving at 60 plus miles per hour. So if they're doing that on official company time or errands, we want to make sure that they have a good driving record. So that's something we might check. And after hire, we may even require them to do a safety course.
Yeah. Nice. Look at you guys. I think that put 9 very clear examples out for people to think about, what applies to my role, my company, the jobs I'm hiring for. All really helpful. And I'm sure we could keep going. There's plenty of things you could check about a person endlessly, right? And so I want to get into the question of like, how many of these do you actually do in a role? And maybe I'll give this to you first, Spencer, and then either Nicole or Kendra, if you want to jump in and have a thought. Because I think the name of the game right now is hiring, like removing as many steps from the hiring process as possible so that the top candidate can kind of glide right in, right? And feel comfortable. So Spencer, how do you go about thinking what tests to administer to what people?
Yeah, so to put it in layman's terms, I would say, which ones should we use? The helpful ones. Yeah. We want to identify which pieces of information are going to be most helpful in determining if someone is either the best candidate or screening out obviously bad candidates that could introduce some risk to the company. There's a lot to be said for making a bad hire. It can waste a lot of time and money and possibly create some problems for the company.
Yeah.
And I think for my organizations, we do pre-employment based on the position. So different positions require different, PI. Some might require PI, some might not. Some we might need to do the lift test for, some others we don't. So I think it's just, you want to make sure you're selecting the best candidate, like Spencer said, or weeding out the ones that you don't want to move forward with. But you also don't want to draw out the hiring process for the applicant either, because this is a time where they're just waiting for whatever offer is going to come through the fastest. So you want to make sure that it's very, you're going to have standard ones. You're always going to have to check a 9-9, which verifies that the person says who they really are. And most companies do a standard background check with a criminal background. Those are two pretty standard ones that I would say that are consistent. Now, everything else we said is very role specific, and you can, work with your organization of how far they want to dive in, what they really want to look at, and then adjust with those roles and those positions.
Yeah. Kendra, anything you'd want to add there too around picking tests for different people, different roles?
No, they said it really great. It's really, there's got to be a flexibility and adaptability to the role, and understanding that not every role will require the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Nice. Okay. This is great. I think we've kind of solidified a little bit more about how you pick what tests and match them with what role you're hiring for. Let's talk now about hiring for a specific role, and where during the process do you actually put these tests in? Do they occur for every applicant? Do they occur for the top candidate? Is it after you've given them the offer that they accept, and then you do some background tests and confirm? Kendra, let's maybe hear your thoughts on this one first, and then Nicole.
Yeah, absolutely. I am a firm believer of not putting candidates through more than necessary. So I personally only have candidates who I plan to move forward with that are final candidate that we'll do like a reference check on, or even if we're doing a predictive index, they'll be the only ones doing that. For roles such as engineering or design, that's where I'll step back a little bit. And after they go through the second interview, their technical interview, that is where I'll throw in that exercise. We have a pretty good idea of their skills at that point. Now we're just looking to verify before we send them on as a final candidate.
Nice. So still kind of role specific, it sounds like.
Very.
But as much towards the end as possible in some ways.
Yeah, like trying to get everything towards the end, and only like maybe our top 3 will experience that kind of in-depth screening versus having 50 people who applied go through and do a predictive index and have to sift through that. It's just creating more work for myself at that point, and I'm a one-person team. Yeah. I don't want to do that any more than the next person. So it's just really about harnessing and also making the process move smoothly and quickly for those people. We're in a completely different market than we've ever been in. And people are, you're getting all these people in and they're like, oh, I've already found a job as soon as you're reaching out to them. So it's definitely like, okay, well, I need to move quick.
Yeah, and then the other pieces that Kendra, so she does all of the pre-hire, the background, the drug testing, lift tests. Those are everything that you're going to do once the applicant accepts the offer. So you've made the verbal, you sent them their actual offer letter, they're signing it, and then that's when you start the background. You finish maybe your reference checks, those sorts of things. So a reference as in like you're verifying employment, education pieces, that sort of thing. But you do that, the drug testing, all after they've accepted the offer. That's your next hiring step.
Yeah, and to save yourself some headache in your offer, whatever the offer is, you're going to want to make sure that if you do have post-offer screening that you're going to do, it's very clearly stated that the offer is contingent upon successfully passing the post-offer screening.
Yep, that was actually going to be a follow-up question of mine, because these and maybe Nicole, if you wanted to share more, I think Spencer just hit on it basically, but yeah, like because they've signed something, but now are you going to back out when you find out they somebody? Probably, but how do you how do you do that in a legal way,
Yeah, so there's what's called adverse action letters. So on the criminals, like when you do the background, when we talk about driving records, their criminal background, federal, anything like that you're looking in to see if they have any tickets, any warrants, anything like that. If something comes back that isn't in line with your company's expectations of their employees, maybe they have a theft, maybe they have a felony, a misdemeanor, whatever your guidelines are, you have like Spencer said, from your offer letter, you have that ability to move forward with not hiring the applicant. So, for example, I've always used HireRight, and they are a third-party vendor who can complete the background check screening for an applicant. And in part of their module, they will give you the list of criminal activity, if there is some or none. And if there is anything, you have the option to say that you're not moving forward with the applicant. And then what you do is you send that applicant what's called an adverse action letter. So it sends the applicant their background check that was processed, and then it also sends them a letter stating of, you know, if you feel these charges are incorrect or need to be disputed, it walks them through how they can go through and do that. And there's a set time frame, standards usually 7 days, where they can take action, contact the third party, follow the instructions on what they need to provide, and then if everything comes back, you know, if something changes, you have that option to then move forward with the applicant. But most times than not, you just move forward and decline the candidate with the offer and the adverse action letter. But there's specific steps that you'll take with your vendor to follow those instructions and allow the applicant time to respond to anything negatively that has been uncovered.
Perfect. And we got a question from the audience here related to this. Our offer letters are contingent upon results of the screenings, I assume. Is that something you would recommend is a good option? It sounds like yes. Yeah. All right. Lots of nods. So hopefully that's helpful. Okay, let's dive deeper into the legal aspects of it, because I think we've opened up kind of this can of worms here. And Spencer, maybe you could start us off here. So earlier you were talking about discrimination and disparate impact and all these things. So how do we make sure these tests, because you're doing a lot of things that could, you're checking for a lot of things that open up discrimination, opportunities to discriminate. How do we make sure that doesn't happen, or what's at stake here?
Yeah, so first of all, you want to be aware of what the protected classes or protected groups are for your area. And that may depend on who you're providing HR support for. Here in Utah, I've got to worry about Title VII. In Ireland, I might be worrying about the 9 grounds of discrimination. So it does vary from one geography to another, and you need to be aware of what are the country, state, provincial, municipal legislation that's in place that would offer protection to candidates. So I would say make sure you do some research on that. I realize that most of our audience is probably here in the US. But if you are a global company and you are processing data of a EU applicant, you do have to take into account GDPR, that's the General Data Protection Regulation, and make sure that you're compliant with those laws as well.
Yeah, great. Do your research, really, and see what is relevant. Kendra, let's kick it over to you too as well. What advice would you give around making sure, you know, these tests aren't leading to any sort of legal issues?
I definitely agree. You just you have to do your research. But Americans with the Disabilities Act, it has some very specific things about pre-employment settings. Like you can't do any pre-hire tests that may be construed as a medical exam or a test for mental health. So when you're looking at these things to do maybe aptitude tests, you have to be very careful and cautious about how you're choosing them and how they end up results. So that way you're within compliance of that as well.
Yeah. Awesome. Nicole, anything you'd want to add on legal concerns?
I think just be aware of who's receiving those results and who's making that final determination. A lot of companies, your recruiters will be the one who initiates the offer letter and starts the background process, but you don't you don't want your hiring manager to see what the background comes back on an applicant or what their drug testing results are. If you're not moving forward, you just need to make them aware that unfortunately we're not moving forward any longer with the applicant, and you don't need to provide them the additional details. It's for HR's eyes only. No matter what they say or what they ask for, you shouldn't be providing them any information on the applicant.
Yeah. So as much as, I mean, sounds like almost it's always in HR, keep that information. Are there times though when you need to share it with the manager so that they can be a part of deciding whether or not it's worth disqualifying the candidate for?
I never have. If, like Kendra said, if Americans with Disabilities, if somebody discloses that they have a disability and they need an accommodation, I keep that very close to our HR circle, and I will just work with the hiring manager and say that we need this accommodation for this applicant. Please make these necessary adjustments. And I keep it very straightforward. I let them know what the requirement is. I let them know what they need to do. And then I follow up with the applicant once we hire them, and the manager to make sure that everything's in place for that person. But other than that, I never disclose. That's something that if once hired, the new hire wants to discuss that more openly with their team, with their manager, whoever they interact with, that's their personal decision. But we want to keep all of that protected for them until they want to disclose anything.
Makes total sense. Kendra or Spencer, anything you want to jump in around like the sensitivity of this, or what should be shared or what shouldn't be? I think Nicole gave a good thought there. Go ahead, Kendra. I see you.
You know, as for reference checks, there's not a whole lot of like confidential laws around that and legal implications, but there is a lot of privacy issues that come into play with that, and privacy is becoming a bigger thing for employers. With reference checks, I keep those very close as well. I don't really share those with anybody outside of who really needs to see it. It's currently 3 people at our company who get to see reference checks. It's me doing them. The founder always reviews them, and then the hiring manager will also review them. But we treat those as very sensitive. We don't want anybody else to see those. We don't want it to get back to the incoming employee what was said, anything like that. And we also want to keep the confidence of the people that we are speaking to, so they feel that they can give us truthful answers and not fluffy stuff all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, basically, if we were to kind of narrow this down into just some general guiding principles, you're only wanting to gather as much information as you need to make a good hiring decision that is relevant to the role, and you're only sharing it as broadly as is necessary to make that decision.
Yeah.
Reason being, the more information that you introduce into the process that's not related to the role, the greater opportunity you have for introducing more subjective assessments and biases. And that's where you start to increase your exposure for discrimination and disparate impact. I realize I've mentioned disparate impact a couple of times. So just to give a real quick definition of what that is, it's where you have a seemingly neutral process, policy, or rule, but it has a disproportionate negative impact on a protected group.
Yep. Perfect. Love that. The principles are there. Sounds like keep it, need to know basis, right? And as little information as you need to collect. Well, great. We have one more segment we want to just go over together. And then we always give everyone one last opportunity to kind of share any parting words of advice. This last one is on communication. So how do you talk to candidates about the fact that you're going to be collecting urine sample and they have to do this personality test and this and this and this? How do you communicate to them the importance of this and why it's happening? Nicole, maybe you could start us off on this one, and Kendra as well.
The way I've always handled it, and it might vary from HR representative to HR representative, but once I extend the verbal offer, and I just walk them through this is our hiring process. So for us, our next steps is you are going to sign your offer letter. We're going to send you a link for your background and your drug testing. You need to complete it within this amount of time frame. Again, just remind them that you know, your offer is contingent upon you successfully completing these 2 processes. As soon as we get the results back, I will contact you. I will, you know, let you know what your start date is. So just very openly communicating what the process is, what the expectation is. The deadlines are really important, especially when it comes to just the market and the environment. If you're sending somebody out to a third party to collect any sort of sample, to do any sort of test, because you're going to be at their scheduling situation, which at times can be very extended and might be outside your, you know, window to collect a sample or for them to complete the tests that you need them to complete. So I just try to over communicate, let them know that it might be a little bit of a delay if you can't schedule within the time frame. We need to know by this date and this time. So just walk them through the process and be available to them if they call and have questions, because this is, you know, as much as this is a applicant's market right now, it also is, it varies from company to company of what the expectation is. And they might not have, they might not be used to completing your drug test and your background tests or whatever the requirements are for your company, because it could be totally different than what they did at their last employer. So just being open, being understanding, and just really making it very simple for them to understand and very clear of what the expectation is.
Awesome. Kendra, and I'll turn over to you, but I also want to tack on an additional question here around, do you need to communicate at all, right? Because reference checks and things happen without their knowledge, I assume. But tell me about it.
So I put everything in the job advertisement. From the very beginning, I'm outlining what our process looks like for candidates. I don't want anybody going into this thinking, oh, like this is going to be like a one and done interview, or, you know, they don't do any of this stuff. So I'll put it in the job advertisement. It'll outline our process. So you'll have your first interview, your second interview. If we have an assessment, it's going to be there. Your interview with the founder. If you're going to, everybody has a reference check, so it'll show a reference check, and then the offer stage. And then in that first interview, we do more of a cultural interview. And at the end of that interview, it's just me. And so I'll spend about 10 to 15 minutes in that interview answering any questions, along with going ahead and going more into detail about what they should expect going forward. And then as they're moving through the process, I'm also emailing them and calling them and telling them, hey, you're in the next stage. Here's what's going to happen. Here's what to expect. I have a habit of throwing little tidbits into the end of my spiel at that first interview and giving them hints, dropping hints like, this is what you're going to see in the second interview. They may ask you about this. And I know they're going to ask them about that. And we're looking to see if you're doing your research and you're listening to us as we're moving through as well. So always be aware, I guess, when you're going through an interview process, because there are little tidbits in there. But yeah, you absolutely have to communicate that. I think it's very questionable to do a reference check without informing the candidate. I think we would always want the candidate to know that we're doing that on them, and we would also want them to contact their references. Like, I can't stress enough how many people have given me references that they've never even told I'm going to be calling them, and it makes for very awkward conversation. And those people aren't prepared to talk to us in the in-depth setting that we're needing them to.
Yeah. Great. Okay. Go ahead, Spencer.
Yeah. I like what Nicole and Kendra have said, and they both said multiple times expectations. And it's so important to set clear expectations from the beginning. This is your candidate experience that we're talking about. And this is your opportunity to create first impressions, hopefully good first impressions. Because it's the start of a relationship that you hope is going to endure for years. So making sure that you are ensuring that the process is very seamless and that everybody understands who's doing what and when and why is extremely helpful.
Yeah, nailed it. Okay, that was our last big question for all of us, and so I'm gonna give everyone now an opportunity to answer this last one before we do a send off, which is, in a sentence or two, what final piece of advice do you have for all the people who are just getting off this call thinking I have to do X, Y, Z and this and communicate, and I don't want to get, you know, in a lawsuit? What's your final kind of simple piece of advice for people who are thinking about pre-employment screening right now? Spencer, we'll let you do yours first. Then we'll go to Kendra, and Nicole will finish us off.
Yeah, I'll be really brief. Research and right size.
I would just say one day at a time. Like, none of it, we're all human. At the end of the day, I'm not the walking encyclopedia of knowledge. There are days that people come to me with things and I'm like, you know what? I don't know. Let me research that and get back to you. And I think just acknowledging our limitations is the most important thing we can do as HR professionals.
And just to piggyback off of you, Kendra, it's one applicant at a time too. Don't see your open positions and all of the applicants that are coming through. Take it focus on one person at a time, start to finish, do it the right way, and don't be rushed.
Amazing. Okay, great advice from these three. We've had an awesome conversation. If you want to learn a little bit more about pre-employment screening, this video will actually be posted at the top of our HR Encyclopedia article. We also have probably a dozen other articles on screening in general. Hopefully all the tests that they talked about, we'll eventually have articles on if we don't already. Get more details there. Also, go meet these panelists. They are members of the HR Mavericks community. You can find them on LinkedIn. They're great people, as you can tell, very smart, and we always learn from them. So thank you three so much for being here. Thank you for everyone who's watching and listening, and we hope everybody has an amazing rest of their days. See you guys.
See ya.
Thank you.